By doing this review, we're proving we are not cops. Let's talk about 72 Hours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss 72 Hours. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to let the people know what they should be checking out this week?
So this week, I watched the first 6 or so episodes of I Will Find You a Better Home, which is a Chinese drama series about real estate agents in Shanghai. It's from 2020, and it's one of those shows that has billions of views. And you've never heard of it because it's not very well known outside of China. But there it was, I think, one of the biggest things in the early 2020s. It follows the story of somebody who is sent to be the new manager of a real estate agent in Shanghai. And she's kind of this career-focused hard ass. She's sent to this particular branch because their numbers have not been good and they're seemingly full of slackers and they're not doing the job properly. And she's basically made co-manager with the guy who's been running this estate agent for the last couple of years. And he's a very hands-off, very laid-back kind of guy. And the main conflict is between those two as they try to kind of save their jobs and try to convince the other that their way is better. And then in between, each of the different characters have their own little things going on and their reasons for doing what they're doing. And every couple of episodes, there's a new client who has very particular needs or particular situation, which the estate agents then kind of get drawn into. A lot of it is about this idea of how important a home is to somebody's life and how whenever one of these agents sells a house to a client, it's very much about helping them realize the life they wanted to have all along. And also about how a lot of people are realizing that the future that they were promised or that they were hoping for is not going to happen. And that is kind of expressed through this idea of whether or not somebody is able to find a home and is able to afford it and all of that. First of all, it's just a solid drama by itself. The characters are well realized. It's a very Chinese writing, so it gets a little bit melodramatic in places, and some of the characters laid on a little thick sometimes. But once you get into kind of the style of it, it's a really well-written show. It's also set in the neighborhood where I used to live 20 years ago. So seeing those streets and those buildings again, like 20 years later, is kind of cool. So it's not just in the city where I live, but in that actual neighborhood by pure chance. So that's kind of interesting. But just by itself, it's an interesting show. It's a well-made story with characters, and you don't need to know a whole lot background information to kind of get what's going on, right? It's not like a lot of Chinese TV is very apolitical by design because you don't want to attract the wrong kind of attention from regulators and censors and that sort of thing. So a lot of it is very milquetoast, you might think. But in between, the different character stories do explore different ideas of what life is like in China today or in the early 2020s. So on that basis, it's pretty interesting, especially like as a window into something that really resonated with people. Like apparently it's got billions of total views across all episodes. Sometimes it can be interesting to see what is successful somewhere else, right? So you kind of get a feel for what resonates with people and what's on people's minds.
It sounds interesting in a sense of not something that I would like maybe typically go for, but there's clearly like an appeal there that people are resonating with, where it's like kind of like drawing parallels to like real lives and and then themselves and like seeing themselves in kind of some of the scenarios or what's going on in there. It seems interesting and quite different from sort of kind of what I would normally watch anyways.
Like the bottom line is it's a workplace drama, right? And like within like an episode, you kind of know what people's deal is and they're not that complex. But I think if you've never seen a Chinese show before or a movie, like a Chinese movie, and they can be pretty inaccessible and it's not often easy to know what's worth watching. But this is just appearing on, like in the UK, it's on Amazon Prime and it's subtitled and there's zero barrier to entry. Like you don't need to know any history or like there's no like cultural things that you have to know before you can even understand what's going on. Like fundamentally, it's a very simple and straightforward workplace drama. But then as you keep watching, you start getting little details that are kind of interesting.
Cool. Interesting. I guess for myself, and I think this is probably well overdue, and maybe this is actually an early recommendation, maybe too early a recommendation, but I watched the pilot episode of The Wire, which is a crime drama, I believe, from 2002. And the reason I feel like I'm like late to it is because it's like got this like crazy popularity amongst the Black community or Black culture across like America and the UK as well. Like so many of my friends have like watched it, rewatched it several times, kind of like know all the storylines. And it's even like in like rap music and stuff like that. It's like referenced a lot. It was just one that I just never, for whatever reason, ever got round to, not in early 2002 or like whatever. Like I never caught it on TV in the early 2000s when we, used to have like the cable boxes, etc. When it then went on to streaming, etc. I just never checked it because I'm like the person that's what's latest, what's new. But I watched episode 1 and I thought it was actually quite entertaining in terms of it was kind of like laying the law. It was like, setting things up in terms of what the status quo is, who the sort of key players are, who the key people are on the law enforcement side, who the people are on the criminal side of things, more on like the street culture, etc. It was giving you sort of the different power dynamics that people had with each other in the show, and it was just kind of like setting things up for okay, this is the land, and we're going to see kind of what comes from here. I'm very open to kind of seeing where it goes, how it goes. Everyone always says it's the really like intricate storytelling and like how deep it gets, etc. It's kind of what people praise it for. So I'll probably come back here in like another week or so and maybe give an update on my recommendation after I've watched a few more episodes of The Wire.
Yeah, I've not seen The Wire yet either, and I've always heard how brilliant it is. So if it's holding up so far, that's good news, and I'll probably get to it at some point. I think the main reason I haven't watched it yet is because it's supposed to be really heavy and really complex, as in the number of storylines and the complexity of the storylines is supposed to be way up there, and it's not an easy watch. Like, it's not something you can just take in, is kind of what I've been told. And so that's why I've always kind of put it off, but it's definitely on my list of stuff to watch at some point.
Yeah, I did hear that there are some things that happen in there. Well, I not the spoilers, but like that certain things will get me. So yeah, I don't know, man. I think very very much overdue. Looking forward to kind of going on this ride, and yeah, I think I'll report back in like another week or so when I've had a little bit more time with the show.
Sometimes things can be really impactful as they're coming out, but then 20 years later they can seem kind of dated. Especially this seems to be a show that's really talking about social issues and political issues and that sort of thing. And looking at that with like 20 years of distance can be interesting, but it can also mean that what they're talking about is no longer as relevant, maybe. Like I don't know if that's the case here, but that's certainly what it could be. Like a lot of the time, like I will sometimes watch shows from the 80s and 90s, and it can be an interesting time capsule because they're talking about things that are kind of precursors to what we're talking about today, but it's a different world, and some of the things that is a major deal is now something that just wouldn't carry a plot, right? Or wouldn't make news anymore. But you can kind of see kind of how we got there in a way. So sometimes that can be interesting, but it can also mean that it's hard to relate.
Yeah, I mean, so far it's criminals on the streets and law enforcement on episode 1, which I think still kind of holds up to today. But of course, there'll be like you said, like the social issues, like some of the deeper storylines in there, and like whether it's still relevant. So to be fair, I didn't think of it through that lens, but actually it's going to give me like another way to kind of like look at the show and sort of critique the show when I'm actually watching it as well.
It really depends on what they lean into. I think it tends to lean a lot into like urban crime and like what American inner cities were like in the 90s, early 2000s. From what I've heard, is very different to what it is now. So that may or may not impact how relevant it is. But yeah, let me know.
Yeah, to be fair, if you even think about it, the amount of like technology and sort of how much like things have changed and how like easily accessible kind of like you are to other people, etc. Between 2002 and 2026, like so much has changed in terms of like the landscape of how we like interact with one another. So yeah, there'll probably be elements of it that don't feel the same.
Also social issues, right? Like in terms of what inner cities are like and the amount of crime, for instance. I think in the 90s, it was just much more dangerous in a major city to just walk down the street compared to what it is today. Like apparently, it's not just about do people have smartphones.
Well, even to be fair, they were doing like cash scams or whatever. There was like one drug user that was trying to do like fake notes. And to be fair, I think that might feel dated in the sense of like we don't really use that much cash in today's day and age. I think the criminals probably still do, but it just looked obviously fake and it looked like an obvious whatever. Like obviously that probably wouldn't work in today's day and age. But yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to the main attraction?
Yeah, 72 Hours, Kevin Hart's latest Netflix film. Dan, do you want to let people know a little bit of a synopsis as to what the movie's about?
Yeah, for a while I was trying to make a hook that called it a heart attack, but I couldn't quite get there. So 72 Hours is a comedy movie starring Kevin Hart. I think he's made like 5 of these for Netflix. So this is very much a genre onto its own. And it follows the story of Joe, who is a 40-year-old marketing executive whose job is on the line because it turns out he doesn't resonate with the kids these days. And then when by chance he is added to a chat group for a bachelor party, he takes the opportunity and essentially says, okay, if you let me tag along, I will pay for your bachelor party in Miami. And these complete random strangers who are half his age go for it. When he then arrives in Miami, various hijinks ensue, including generational clashes and Joe realizing his life is not as much in order as he thought. And it turns out out that hanging out with these 20-year-olds for 72 hours is a bit of a transformative experience. And then it turns out the Airbnb they rented from is owned by organized crime. And that then sets off into motion a series of hilarious events. So what did we think of 72 hours?
I feel like I watched the movie in the most ideal way possible that you can watch a movie like this, in a sense of I'd been drinking last night, woke up a little bit tired, a little bit groggy from all the drinking, had a pizza on the sofa, had a little Coke Zero, and just put this on and just kind of like rotted away on the sofa whilst the movie played. And you know what? I wasn't mad at it. I didn't hate it. Is it kind of fine art? Is it like anything that should be in the theatre or anything that will be critically acclaimed? No, but I feel like there's like space for these kind of movies where it's just a bit of dumb fun. This is very much just a whole bunch of like dumb fun because there's so many aspects of this that don't make sense and are just like completely like outlandish and like wacky, and just clearly it's there to not be taken seriously, and it's just kind of there to kind of help you pass some time if you've got some time to pass in the evening. I kind of give the film a little bit of credit in terms of like it did try to kind of like tackle some certain things like you mentioned there about sort of kind of trying to relate to sort of the younger generation, trying to figure yourself out or whatever. To be fair, actually, the way that they kind of like portrayed some of the Gen Z is kind of like it's a little bit different. I mean, some of it was like dumb and like, you know, kind of stereotypical, but like other aspects of it were like quite different too. Sort of how it's sort of sometimes portrayed. The story's a bit wild. It makes sense. Like everything makes sense. Everything follows along well. It's like a story that you can kind of watch from beginning to end, and you can maybe take something out of it. And there's like some ideas that you can appreciate out of it. As a comedy, was it funny in moments? Yes, I can give it sort of some moments where I kind of thought it was funny, but for the most part, it was just like, okay, cool. It was whatever. This is not fine art. This is not, you know, you can tell that we didn't have any other movies to talk about this week, or there wasn't any other releases between the Odyssey and Spider-Man, which is why we landed on here. But if it's just like a very chill evening and you just want something easy to watch, then you wouldn't be mad at putting this on, is what I feel.
There's this whole genre of not even stoner comedies, but like slightly raunchy buddy comedies related to bachelor parties, or what's the equivalent for women? It's a hen do in the UK. What's it called in American?
I thought it was a hen party. I actually don't know if there's a different name, or bachelorette party or something like that. I don't know.
Bachelorette party. That's the one. Yeah. So like that whole thing, right? This whole thing about adults going on one last bender before real life begins, and then they find the meaning of life and the power of friendship and all of that while getting into hilarious and compromising positions. There's a whole bunch of these, right? The Hangover is the classic, and I kind of like those. There's a whole bunch of others which are kind of mixed, and I've seen it compared to Superbad as well, which is also about kind of like growing up and getting into a series of hilarious situations on the way. These tend to be fine. Like they're not my favorite, they're not terrible. It comes down to the individual movie. And so that's more or less what I expected with this one. And then the first 20 minutes actually kind of made me pause a little bit and say, oh, this seems to be about something. Like this seems to be not quite as generic. And it's about Joe getting old, right? While at the same time kind of struggling with growing up, right? So his girlfriend wants to get married and he just can't quite get there on his own. But at the same time, he's beginning to feel kind of the cultural disconnect from the young people, which is kind of a big deal if you're in marketing. And so he has this encounter with these Gen Z 20-somethings who are culturally completely different from him. And he kind of walks into it thinking he has something to teach them, but actually they have something to teach him. And it kind of like that's kind of the first 20 minutes to a half hour. And then the last 5 minutes, kind of the payoff to that. And in between, we have like 80 minutes of filler. That's pretty much what it is, right? So at around the half hour mark or so, I didn't time it exactly, but somewhere around there. Basically, the running and the shouting and the cursing starts, and it lasts for well over an hour. And maybe 10% of that I thought was kind of fun. Like there's a scene where they're stuck on a boat and they have to hang on to compromising cargo because it turns out to be like an illegal cargo and that sort of thing. Like, and there's getting entangled with the mob, and I think at some point some grifters steal their money and they have to get it back and that sort of thing. And I thought very little of that had anything to do with the message or the themes of the movie as the movie presents it to you in the first 20 minutes or so, and what the movie says in the end. There's some connections there, but not a lot. Like it's again one of those cases where the movie itself is not about a whole lot. It's just about creating wacky and fun situations that are supposed to be clippable and shareable on YouTube and whatever. But we also spent a lot of time on the supposed message of the movie. And so one of those two is taking up too much space. If this was just Kevin Hart running and shouting for 100 minutes and they just went all out in like the 72-hour chaos that the characters go on, then you could have judged it on the basis of, okay, how do these different episodes stack up? But if the movie presents itself as this is about masculinity and growing up and being on top of things in your life and realizing that you're getting old and you're no longer one of the young people and you have to realize that they actually have better ideas than you did at that age and that sort of thing, then the movie as a whole should be about that, in my opinion. And it's not really. So it feels a little bit like they had an idea for a beginning, for a hook, and then had an idea for an ending that feels like it's saying something. And then in between, they kind of brainstormed a bunch of stuff that can happen, and then they filmed that. So on that basis, it felt a little bit disposable and not really something where I would say, okay, yeah, this is going somewhere interesting. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, on that, I feel like this is not the first time that we've like mentioned something like that where there's a good idea in it at the start and at the end. And I'm trying to remember what we kind of spoke about. There was like another movie or something like that, or it was a show where the idea was there, but then they just kind of like filled the middle of it with just like a whole bunch of...
One of them was Borderlands, which basically tried to convince you that it was about a whole bunch of different things, but really it's about running and shooting. There's lines at the end of the movie where the movie is just lying to you about what the movie has. Like, it tries to convince you that it's about something, but that only happens in the last 10 minutes. Like, you're right, we've had a few of those. So I don't think it's quite as egregious. I think it's kind of a shell that they thought of, but then they didn't really construct the story to really support that idea is the problem.
In kind of defense of the movie, I did think that there were like element of it a little bit in terms of like when it was getting a little bit wacky and silly, where they kind of showed like that kind of like generational divide between the two. And I think obviously that's what they're going to sort of mainly try to play the laughs off of, but just kind of like how they prepare for a night out where Kevin Hart's character, I think his name is Joe, very, very bog standard name, where he's having to like trying to like line his stomach with that sort of liquid from the pharmacy, which I can't remember what it was.
Pepto-Bismol, yeah, because he's got an upset stomach, or he will get an upset stomach if he parties too hard. And so because he's 40, and so he just chucks the Pepto-Bismol beforehand so he can keep up with the young kids.
Yeah, there's that. I also thought like, even though they were like getting into situations, I thought like it was not well done, but it was like, because it was like Joe's fault in the movie, how it was kind of creating that like conflict between sort of the younger generation, the older generation, and stuff like that, and just like creating that divide and sort of allowing himself to kind of realize that maybe he's not built for this life anymore. Maybe he's kind of like past it and he's past his kind of like best, like whilst he can like maybe do it on the other occasion, like trying to keep up with these sort of Gen Zers for 3 nights straight on a bachelor party just isn't kind of who he is. And like the more he tries to do it, the more he's kind of like messing up. So I kind of felt like that helped kind of like fit in with the message a little bit in terms of what they were telling. But I also kind of feel like for like a movie like this to have like some of the crazy things that they try to do in the movie to really kind of gel really well into sort of the overall message and what they're trying to tell. For like how wacky they want to be with the entertainment side of things, I feel like it's kind of difficult to kind of mold it into the message.
You're right that there are some moments where they make it matter, but in the end, Joe does keep up with them, and he does have this 3-day-long chase sequence, right? So he has an idea of how to make it matter. At the 50% mark, he runs out of steam, and he can't run anymore. And the young guys could still keep going, but then they have to make a choice whether they want to leave him behind or not, because at this point, they've become friends. That's an idea. And then the second half is a different kind of movie, or maybe one that doesn't involve quite as much running, but more, I don't know, outsmarting people, or like with experience, as opposed to going whole hog in the Miami nightlife. You know what I mean? Like, there would have been a way to make it matter.
Yeah, I guess. To be fair, I think actually his character was very confusing in terms of like how much he needed his promotion and how much money he was just like throwing everywhere, which kind of didn't quite correlate, but that's like a whole other separate issue. But I did feel like he did kind of like use this smart a little bit to try and like help the sort of like Gen Zers, especially when it was coming to the taller guy and like trying to like kind of overcome like his fear of like putting himself back out there, etc. And just like how he like helped him kind of like navigate certain situations, like interacting with females and stuff like that. I felt like he kind of used his maturity a little bit in certain instances. I actually think what the movie, I wouldn't say did well, but it kind of showed a little bit of a difference in terms of like how socially awkward like some Gen Zers like might be in certain situations, in terms of being able to like approach people or like have conversations and stuff like that. I think just kind of like showing some of the frailties and again, it doesn't like really go too deep into it. It's not kind of showing that like, you know, because people are chronically online, they like whatever. So it's not like going too deep into it, but there were just like certain traits that like some of the characters would have that you could like kind of point point and be like, oh, I can kind of see how this is like pulled from something of the real world. And actually, I was actually concerned about that at the start of the movie when he showed like his initial presentation in it. I was actually kind of happy that it turned out to be that he was like a 40-year-old that wasn't in touch with the Gen Zs anymore, because when the commercial came on, I was really like, is this what they think kids actually like? But then it turned out that was actually the whole premise or the whole setup of it. I just kind of like how they drew from like things that you can see in real life and like implemented it into like some of the characters and some of the sort of situations that they were in.
But on balance, it's the Gen Z guys who are much more well-adjusted and much more functioning than Joe is, right? Like they have this thing about where what is the feeling check-in or something like that, or emotional check-in. I don't know if anybody does that. I've never seen that like that explicitly, but it does seem to me like, especially if you grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s like Joe did, you were not talking about your feelings quite as much. That is something that maybe started kind of in the 2000s. So he might have been of the generation in which you just kind of power through and you kind of just like your friends are there to have a good time with, but you wouldn't share like real emotions with them. So like that's a generalization as well, but it seems to me like that was kind of the major bottom line here, that aside from being inexperienced, the Gen Z guys are just better people and Joe has to learn from them.
Would you say they were better people? I felt like the guy that was getting married, Mason, was definitely clearly more mature than the rest of the group and like was more like level-headed, etc. I don't know, I kind of felt like the rest of them, they all had their issues.
Yeah, they did, but like in terms of being in touch with your feelings and being able to talk about them and not bottling things up, right? Like that's one of Joe's problems, that he has kind of this fear of commitment. And like I'm not entirely sure why exactly. He is kind of procrastinating on proposing to his girlfriend. It doesn't seem like he's actually afraid of the commitment or that he's not sure if he wants to be with her. He seems to be very clear about that, but he's just not done it, right? And then by the end, he gets to the point where he does. It seems to me like the movie is making a big point about how Joe is kind of deficient in that way.
Yeah, and I guess we kind of don't see too much outside of like before kind of all of this kicks off with Joe. I think you're right, but I think there was still like that element of, in terms of like the Gen Zers being in touch with their emotions, but there was still like that element of Mason and the guy that created the scrapbook. I can't remember what his name was. In terms of, they were both kind of like harboring a little bit of just like kind of feeling towards each other, which were like a little bit unsaid, which kind of shows that even though there's progress that has been made, there's still like certain levels of like the conversations that are always going to be sort of difficult to have, always going to be sort of difficult to try and sort of have those conversations. Like what happens when you just want to sort of kind of continue to be young and like, you know, free, and then your best friend's getting married and you feel like you're going to lose that person that you've known for your whole life to marriage, basically. And how do you kind of navigate through those emotions? And I feel like, yeah, they were like overall in touch with their feelings and were like doing check-ins with each other, etc. But it kind of still showed that there's still that element of not completely confronting all of these issues that maybe something happening between two people. But I think that's natural anyways. And I think that's just kind of normal. I don't think that's a criticism of them being in touch with their emotions, but like they can't go all the way or whatever like that. I think it's just like normal.
Yeah, there does seem to be something performative about the emotion sharing and the scrapbooking, right? Like there's a limit to how heavy you can get in those, right? You can voice small things, but like there's this, I think it was between Mason and was it Nick? This whole thing about being afraid of losing your friend, right? Because you're at this crossroads and your friend is entering into a new chapter and you are not, and you have a fear of being left behind and that you're going to lose like this friendship you've had for all of these years, right? Like those are all things that are definitely in there, and their rituals don't really help them resolve that, right? I think it's the experience around Joe that kind of pushes them into actually confronting those things, but by themselves, they don't have all the answers, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, one other example that I kind of thought was a little bit more refreshing and like different to kind of what you normally see is like that conversation that Joe and Mason are having when they're on the boat and Mason's kind of like sat by himself and he kind of looks like he's like in his feelings or whatever the case might be. And I think he says something about like his fiance, and then Joe's initial reaction is, "Oh, are you getting cold feet?" And Mason's reaction was just like completely different to like how it would be portrayed in like other things where he's like, "No, I'm just like, if anything, I'm like more than ready for this. Like I'm very ready for this, and I'm just like kind of missing my partner, basically." Which it just kind of went completely different, and it was like again almost like a mirror up to Joe in the movie, which is actually quite interesting in terms of like how he was like handling his situation compared to this like young kid who he thought he was going to come and impart his knowledge on, but actually left that conversation kind of taking something away from Mason, which was quite refreshing.
Yeah, and there's other things too about how they're both at a crossroads, right? Like where Joe is beginning to realize that the world is leaving him behind, which is something you kind of start noticing in your mid to late 30s, right? Because there's now a generation coming of age behind you, and they have different ideas, and they don't particularly care about what you've been doing. They probably don't like you very much. And so they start dominating the discourse around things. At that point, you've had 20 years of it being about you and what you want, and you are starting to experience that, like, that's beginning to be over, right? At the same time, the Gen Z guys are also at crossroads, because it looks like they are either in college or finishing college, and one of them is getting married. And so the thing they've had for much of their adult life is also coming to an end, and they're scared of what comes after. I think that is kind of interesting, like that you have this juxtaposition between those two different things. And I think one thing that seems to be kind of rare is millennials and Gen Z kind of meeting as equals, but like as in there's representation for both groups, and they come together and they kind of have to figure it out. Usually it's very one-sided, right? Where one dominates and then the other is also there. I'm thinking especially of comedy shows and movies that are from a millennial perspective, and then there's like a Gen Z character that is kind of strange, or that is kind of doing things differently. There's a New Girl episode. At the time, they're like the millennials are like 30, and the Gen Z folks are like 18 to 20, and the 30-year-olds are beginning to realize that they're uncool. That kind of has been in the culture for a while now, but I don't think there's very many examples of this where it's actually what the story is about. And like this kind of tries, right?
Yeah, for sure. To be fair, I think everyone in this kind of got a good presentation of themselves, or a good like representation of themselves. I was kind of questioning who's the Black Gen Z? Freshman. I was concerned with like how they were showing him, because he just was a bit of a disaster all throughout, just in terms of like his mental capacity and how like slow he was in some of the conversations that they were having. It was just funny that he just kind of come out with, oh yeah, I can read Japanese, and you know, I know these, like I just know Japanese basically, and it came into a kind of clutch. Basically what I'm saying is I was concerned about his portrayal in this, but then they kind of showed him to have like value as well, and they kind of showed him to have like something that was like a bit of an asset to the team, as opposed to just one-liners that kind of struggled for most of the movie. I think there was like maybe one or two.
He kind of starts out as a bit of a caricature, right? He's just the dumb one. And then over time, they reveal more aspects to him.
Yeah, and not that much more. I think it was mainly just...
a little bit. Not huge amounts, but
yeah,
you know, as much as the others.
What did you think about like them inserting the kind of cartel members, or like the drug lords into this? Because I get it on the entertainment perspective, where you kind of need to have like the element of like danger, and you need to have like the element of life-threatening sort of situation that helps the group kind of bond together. But I felt like that was like tacked on a little bit into the movie.
Yeah, so I think it serves a few different purposes. One of them is it ups the stakes, it creates danger, it gives them a reason for having to do extreme things to resolve the issue. It also means they can't just go to the police at any point, right? Like at some point they just realize they're in too deep, and they kind of have to figure this out. And you've got a fish out of water thing going on. None of them are used to being around criminals, right? And now they have to kind of deal with them. And kind of when Joe has to start impersonating a cartel leader in order to convince the criminals that he's one of them, and he has no idea how to do it because he's a marketing executive. He's not somebody who can draw on personal experience, right?
That actually like kind of led to one of the funnier jokes at the end of the movie, when the actual like real boss was like kind of like, why are you doing a Mexican or Latin accent while you're on coke? Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, when I do coke I sound African American. And then he genuinely was like, oh, is it like hip hop? He's like, no, you dummy. It's like, no. Why would I do an African American accent? I thought that was kind of funny.
That again is kind of a well-worn trope, right? Of this sensitive gangster who calls out the protagonist for taking it too far, or for crossing some line, right? Who is surprisingly articulate and surprisingly sensitive and thoughtful about things in a way you wouldn't expect from a career criminal, maybe. I can't necessarily point to specific examples, but I feel like I've seen that beat like 20 times.
There's definitely it's definitely not the first time this happened. Again, I probably wouldn't have one off the top of my head, but I did interrupt you because I think it was on the flow. But I just kind of wanted to point out that was a good scene.
It's one of those scenes where it's fine. I get why it's there. It's kind of funny in the moment, but I don't think it connects to much else, right? Like it's not like, it seems to be the kind of thing that they kind of just put in because they thought it was funny, not because it kind of furthers the story or says very much about these characters, other than Joe doesn't know what he's talking about, but we knew that already.
No, exactly. Also, in terms of kind of things that were kind of like thrown in there. Do you know when he was like on coke the first time, and then he ends up in this like long kind of Family Guy-esque fight with the other guy on the boat? Did you understand why that was in the movie? Because like I can explain to you.
Go for it.
So that one actually has like real world context to it. So the other guy that he was fighting, Cat Williams, you familiar with Cat Williams?
I don't think so. Who's that?
He's a comedian. So basically, they actually had like real life issues with each other, where like Cat Williams went on a podcast and kind of like said some negative things about him and his wife, etc., etc. And I think they've had like a very long feud over the years. And in recent times, so Kevin Hart did like a roast, as some celebrities do, and like a shock inclusion was Cat Williams, considering like they've had like this like long-standing issue for a very long time. And then it kind of turns out they've kind of like made peace with each other behind the scenes, and they've like kind of like spoken, and they've like reconciled, and they're back to liking each other basically.
But they're milking it.
But yeah, but basically they're milking it, because like in this movie, it was very much like, here's Cat Williams in the movie, and Kevin Hart's gonna allow him to like talk shit to them, and they're gonna have like this very long fight, and it's just gonna appease like anyone that's like familiar with the situation. It's just gonna appease them, and it's gonna like make them like appreciate kind of what's going on the screen. But I remember watching it, I was like, I know Daniel doesn't understand what's even happening, or like the context behind this. To be fair, like it's good to see, because like Cat Williams is like a legend. He's like a lot older than Kevin Hart was, like the generation before. It kind of half ties into the movie a little bit in terms of like different generations coming together and like finding the common ground or whatever. But yeah, it was just like nice to see that they were able to kind of piece it up, and were able to like punch through their issues as shown in this movie, and sort of come to peace or whatever. That's kind of like the backstory to that.
I had no idea about any of that. I don't know who Cat Williams is. I've not heard of this feud between them. It didn't even register as anything special to me. Like, it's not even like the movie was saying, hey, look at this, right? It just kind of happened. And I'll be honest, that was in the part of the movie where I was a little bit checked out and kind of just waiting for something fun to happen. And there was just more fighting and more yelling.
That was the fun in that piece, but yeah, go on.
I guess so. But it kind of faded into the background, right? It was just as interesting and fun as all the other things. But I guess the good thing here is that it didn't pause the movie to make the reference. A lot of the times, like references like this, if you're not in on the joke, you will realize that they're doing a bit, but you kind of have to wait for it to be over, because the movie will not continue until they've done their thing. And here it seems to be embedded into the movie in a way that if you don't know what's going on, it's just part of the movie, which I guess is a good job.
The thing I was actually most invested in was who the movie was going to like say had the upper hand by the end of the fight, because I think that's why it went on for like so long, and that's why there was like a lot of like back and forth, and one had the upper hand and the other didn't. And I think neither one of them kind of wanted to like probably like stand down in it or whatever. I actually thought it finished in a good way, because it's Kevin Hart's movie. He just about won, but then Cat Williams kind of pulled that gun and started shooting the gun, and then like everyone ran and it dispersed, and then it just kind of ended like that. So I know that probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it was just like, it ended in like a way that both will probably be satisfied with, which I was actually happy with. I didn't want like one to feel like, oh, I had to let him win in this movie to make him feel good and make him be part of the movie, and I didn't want Cat Williams to be like, I'm just doing this so like Kevin Hart can have the upper hand, which again doesn't matter for the movie, but it's just one of those extra details.
I guess nobody got embarrassed, and nobody kind of just had to kind of just take it, right? Like, it's not an ego trip by Kevin Hart, I guess, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, that kind of ties into, like, this whole thing ties a little bit into kind of my main complaint with the movie, which is like that the middle hour or so is just not terribly interesting. Like, there's like little pieces here and there where it was kind of amusing, but I'm used to things like The Hangover or Date Night. Have you seen Date Night?
I feel like, is that Adam Sandler? Or no, I think like that's Games Night.
No, it's Tina Fey and Steve Carell. They are basically suburban couple who go on a date night in the city, and when their restaurant reservation falls through, they pretend to be another couple that didn't show up so that they get a table. And it turns out that couple was the cover identity of some people from some kind of gang or like cartel. And because they showed up under their name, they start being pulled into that whole thing that was going on with that cartel, right? And it kind of spirals out of control. What I'm trying to say is that in like all of these movies in this entire genre are very much, you have a little bit of setup, and then you have an hour of sequences of scenes that is basically just one event after the other, and it gets worse and worse, and by the end of it, the main characters kind of come out of it as better people, and they've kind of been shaken out of their routine, and they've kind of learned what matters and that sort of thing. And I think 72 Hours wants to be that kind of movie, but it doesn't quite line up for me. It wasn't quite satisfying is the problem. Did that work for you at all? Like, we've kind of alluded to it, But I think like this is kind of the big thing about the movie, whether or not that worked for you.
Like you said, is like with these type of movies, you kind of have to have like that one thing when it's kind of doing its like wacky stuff. Is it memorable? Is there a scene that, you know, really like if you put this on again, like you're looking forward to seeing that scene again? And I genuinely don't think that there's like anything in here that I feel like I would need to see again, or like was like that hilarious or was like that compelling that I needed to watch it again. It was all kind of like run of the mill. One of the things that I did like was when they were like partying with like the bachelorettes and the girls, and then they all ended up getting drugged. Even though they then end up waking up on the beach, which is like a whole other thing. But just like that whole sequence of that, I thought was like entertaining, especially if you like hear some of the stories that happens in America and like Miami, in these places of like, you know, guys being like roofied and robbed and stuff like that. It kind of like again definitely pulls from real world situations. Even like the boat scene and stuff like that, it was just like I think the only thing that I really kind of took from it was like obviously like the Cat Williams fight, but everything else was just like standard. Like you had like the whole thing in the laundrette with like the police officer Mike Epps coming into the movie and just kind of doing what Mike Epps does. But even that was just whatever in it. I don't think it was like really that great. So I think I'm in agreement with you where the middle part of it was entertaining for what it was. I don't think it was great, and I don't think it hits like the heights of like a Hangover or Due Date or something like any of the other movies in that genre.
And I think what it does differently is that The Hangover, for instance, very clearly connects the hijinks to the friendship of these characters, right? Like at various places throughout the movie, characters make decisions, and they make decisions on the basis of what do they care about and how far are they willing to go for their friends, right? I think it's been a while since I watched a Hangover movie, but the way I remember it is that characters have the chance to back out, but they keep going because it's their friends, right? And because when given the choice, they will go through thick and thin with their friends, right? And in Date Night as well, there are a couple who will go through anything together, and they have to rise to the occasion, and they have to develop skills or do things that are way outside their comfort zone. And the movie keeps reminding us why they're doing it and why they can't just walk away. And it's not just because like somebody's pointing a gun at them, it's because they are in this with a person they care about. And I think because these people are not lifelong friends, and because they're not family and they're not spouses, that angle doesn't work. And so I think they had to find something else that gives these people a reason to stick together even when they could leave. Because that's kind of the formula of this kind of buddy movie. I think there's two big reasons for why this doesn't work. The first is that they don't have this kind of bond, and the movie is not about asserting that bond in that way, I don't think. The second aspect of it is the adventures they go through don't directly tie to the themes of the movie and what the movie says at the end it's about, right? So for instance, I'm not quite sure why Joe in the end does propose to his girlfriend, and why that is kind of the big conclusion, right? It's at the start of the movie, we are told that he's in a rut and he's not sure if he deserves her and all of that. And by the end of it, he does propose to her, right? I'm not sure that the 80% of the movie in the middle teaches him the lessons that he needs to learn in order to get to that point. It seems like those are three disconnected pieces that are just arranged in a way that makes you think it's one story, but when it's really two. That's kind of my takeaway from it.
Yeah, I don't. For me, I felt like there was like small parts in the middle part that kind of helped, you know, help him get to where he like needed to get to. I don't know whether I was just being stupid or whether it was like tied hungover. I was genuinely surprised when like they were waiting in like the meeting room for the presentation, and like he's in a rush, and I think they do like a little bait and switch where he's got like all the bags and stuff like that, and he's like saying he's on the way, but then ends up going to his partner because that's what like the most important thing is for him, and like, you know, everything else is a little bit secondary. For me, that kind of fed from his conversation with obviously Mason, and he does reference it, the kind of like quiz or questionnaire or whatever. And I think it also probably like stems from like seeing the bond, and I think you're referring to Joe and then the rest of the group, because obviously the rest of the group are like friends. But I think maybe there was like an element of like seeing like the group and like their bond and like, you know, their connection, and like maybe understanding kind of actually the human side of things and like having the human connection, whatever. But I think I'm doing a bit of heavy lifting for the movie on that front.
I think you're hallucinating.
To be fair, yeah.
As in, that's what it should be, and that's what it kind of feels like it is. But I don't think it's quite there. And if it's there, it's not to a degree that earns it, I don't think.
Yeah. And to your point about like how they should have done it, where like I think they had the the idea there of like obviously he had the money and they didn't have the money where they needed to stick together, but it's not strongly reinforced to a sense of like kind of don't want him around, but if we don't have him around, we're gonna go away from all these like nice things and it's just gonna be like a regular thing. And actually for my best friend, like on Nick's part, for my best friend, I want him to have like the best bachelor party. So maybe we just keep Joe around a little bit longer than we like anticipated, whilst like obviously the movie then starts to force him to like make the bond. So I think they could have leaned into that angle a little bit more than they did.
Yeah, did they, to a significant degree? Like, I don't remember much of a scene in which they are kind of torn between those two different things. On the one hand, they want to just hang out with their friends and they just want kind of to be among themselves, but then also they want to do things for which they need Joe, right? Like that's what it is, right? Like he keeps paying for stuff, including this thing when he rents them a yacht and there's a double booking, and so he says, no, like give me a minute, I'm gonna figure this out, and I'm just gonna keep throwing money at this and fast talk people until I can buy you guys this experience, right? That's there kind of fairly early on in the movie. I'm just imagining scenes in which that is the source of conflict between those two groups, right? Or like the young guys on the one end and Joe on the other, and how the nature of their relationship changes over the course of the movie because it starts out as one thing and then turns into another gradually and organically. It seems to me like that's what it should have been, and if it had done that, then we would be talking about this movie in a very different way. It's a bit like Superbad, right? So like Superbad also has essentially two groups of people, right? You've got McLovin, who is a bit of a jerk, but he's got the beer, right? Which for 16-year-olds is a big deal. And you've got the other two guys who are the real friends, and they end up kind of becoming real friends by the end of it because of all the things they've gone through together. But throughout the movie, that distinction informs how they relate to each other and what they're willing to do for each other. That's kind of one of the big pillars of Superbad. And it seems to me like that sort of thing is what they should have done here as well. And not just mention it like once or twice, but actually have it drive the plot. And because it doesn't, it feels kind of tacked on and hollow. At least it did to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I was kind of like smiling there because it actually just kind of takes me back to what you were saying earlier about the middle portion of the movie, because you mentioned Superbad and like literally just like so many scenes just like flood into my head of like why that movie is such a classic. You literally can think of like so many different things of just like McLovin or like them with like him with the police officers and stuff like that. That is a classic.
And it's better in two different ways. One of them is that it has this human core at the end, right? Where in the beginning, it's been a while, so correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but basically in the beginning, they essentially are trying to get laid. And in the end, they really care about these girls and have a real relationship with them. And you believe that the things they experienced over the 90 minutes got them from one to the other, right? They started out as kind of superficial 15-year-olds, and they kind of grew up over the course of the 90 minutes. And that's one way in which it's different. The second one is that all the different episodes are much more memorable, right? Like as you are mentioning and as we're talking about it, like I've not seen the movie probably in 6 or 7 years, and I'm having images of McLovin trying to buy beer and getting caught up in the convenience store robbery, or the cops being stoned and him being terrified and trying to make it through in some way. It's a whole thing, right? So I think on the one hand, that movie gets the emotional aspect of 15-year-olds learning to grow up because of the experience they have on the one hand, and on the other hand, the individual episodes are actually much better and much more memorable. Like I'm already struggling to remember examples of things that worked well in this movie, and I think there's a few things, but they're few and far in between.
That's why we kind of go back to what you were saying earlier about, and it kind of ties into what I said about like having like the cartel as like this obligatory threat or whatever, because in Superbad, like most of the situations that they find themselves in is driven by the desire to just get beer for this party. So like again, when he's in the community, he's in there because he needs to get the beer, and then he just ends up in this situation and it kind of spirals from there. Even when Jonah Hill's character is at like that like Brazilian or like Latina party or whatever, and he ends up dancing with the wrong girl or whatever, but they're there because they're like trying to get beer any way that they can, and they end up at this party. And I can't remember how they ended up at this party. I think they got invited there or whatever by some guy that whatever, and then they just end up in like a whole crazy situation off it. And I feel like just like that desire and like that motivation for them to kind of keep going and keep wanting to get the beer, like you said, for like the reason of like wanting to get laid or whatever like that, they'll hook up with these girls, just kind of like really hammers at home, and like it just kind of like links that crazy stuff to like the core of the movie.
And a lot of these movies have really grounded premises, right? Superbad is about teenagers trying to buy beer. I remember growing up in the early 2000s in Germany, where people started getting fake IDs at like 14 because the drinking age was 16, and it was really easy. Like our school made it really easy to get fake IDs, especially if you were born in 86, and you could easily turn that into an 85, and that made, if you were 15, that made you old enough to buy beer, right? So like it's like that whole thing about if you are 15 or like just under the drinking age, just getting beer is something you want, and it's also seemingly an impossible task, and you're willing to do just about anything for that. But so that is very grounded and very realistic and very relatable. In Date Night, it's just two people trying to save their marriage because they're a bit in a rut and they just don't want to be the one who backs out, right? And in Hangover, it's been a bit too long to remember the details of that, but it's ultimately about friends trying to save their friendship and trying to save their group. So each of those three have really grounded and simple and relatable motivations, and then the escalation happens. And here it starts off with craziness, right? Where it's this guy who gets added to this group chat by chance and essentially just weasels his way into a bachelor party with people he doesn't know. And that's already a comedy premise, right? Like that's already not relatable, not grounded. Which of us have done this, right? Nobody. Like I don't know anybody, right? I think one of the reasons it doesn't quite work, and we're now up to reason number 3, is that it does not have this relatable human grounding, and then it gets weird, right? It starts off weird and then gets weirder. And I think that makes it extra hard to care.
It makes sense for Joe in the movie in the sense of he's a marketing officer or whatever his job is, and he needs to get back in touch with what the youth likes because he needs to be able to market to them. For him, that makes sense. For 90% of other people, that unless you like maybe like have like family members or whatever, you don't really like care about like needing to relate to Gen Z or whatever the case might be. Basically, it's not relatable to everyone. Like not everyone can like find themselves in Joe's shoes or like relating to Joe. It's like very specific and it's very tailored to him and other people directly like him. Because like with like The Hangover, where you're trying to save your friendship group, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter where you are in life. You can, be young, you can be old or whatever. Everyone probably has like this idea of like friends kind of like growing apart or like becoming a little bit different from each other and needing to really relate and like, kind of like hold on to the friendship that you've had.
It's the most relatable thing. Like everybody has lost friends just because you drifted apart and you wished it hadn't happened, but no, there's nothing you can do. It's super relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
I just had an idea for rewriting this, for making it more relatable. What if Joe had been Mason's uncle? And like for a long time, he was the cool uncle because he was young enough to still get it. And now he realizes like he's not getting invited to the bachelor party because he's too old. He's not cool anymore. And he has to figure out how to be the cool uncle again. And the only way he can think is to start throwing money around because that way he's needed. It seems to me like that would make it more relatable, right? Like not everybody will have been in that exact situation, but a lot of people have been in something a little bit similar, right? Where you realize you've no longer got it. Like the thing that made you cool or made you popular or that worked for you or came easy to you. At some point you realize, no, like that thing has just disappeared. And now I have to figure out something different, but that means walking away from who I used to be. And not everybody wants to do that. A lot of people will want to try to rekindle their youth or what worked for them when they were younger, or they don't want to admit that they have to move on. So what if that's what this was about? So they are family and that's why they are kind of stuck with each other, but really the young guys don't want him around anymore because like there's this whole thing about them calling him Unc and the OG, right? Seems a little bit like it makes sense that they're saying it, right? It's not like it doesn't make sense, but it's not personal, right? It doesn't cut close to home for him other than the general principle of he doesn't want to be old.
No, I think that's just like slang. It's like you might see someone that's like,
of course, yeah.
Call them like Unc and stuff like that. Yeah.
He's not been called that before. It's my sense.
Which is crazy. I thought years old, he definitely should have been, but yeah, no, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I've been called boomer, which is funny by itself, but I recently started hanging around in areas where there's younger people like early 20s, and I kind of realized that even though we have the same hobby, we don't have anything in common, like personality-wise or interests or frame of reference, and nothing has made me feel older than hanging out with like 22-year-olds at an event where technically we're all there for the same reason. Intellectually, I knew this was going to happen, but actually being full in a room of 22-year-olds and they don't care about what I think is humbling.
Do you want to share your experience?
Well, and that's basically the extent of it, right? Like it's just like a few months ago I started hanging out at this game store and we all have the same hobby. We're all there to play the same game. We all broadly have the same kind of outlook on things, but my frame of reference, like my formative influences, how I approach things, how I think, is just fundamentally different from people who are 15 years younger than me. And that has just not really happened at scale because in the past I would run into I I've had this a few times at work where there's like an intern who is like straight out of university, and I realize I don't have much in common with this person, and I look at things completely differently. And in many cases, I might have better ideas than them, but also they don't really respect my ideas. But it's just one-on-one. And it's a little bit different to be faced with that kind of like nobody made me feel unwelcome in this community, right? And there's no complaints on that level. It's just a matter of they're not my people anymore, and it's purely based on age.
Fair. I haven't come across that yet, or if I have, maybe I'm in denial.
It will happen.
No, I'm for sure it will happen. I'm very sure it's going to happen.
I'm late 30s. Joe is 40. That's more or less the window in which this starts happening, because you start engaging with adults who have like their fully formed opinions, and they just do not care about you. Before that age, everybody in that role is more or less in your group, and at that age, you start encountering people who just have completely different frames of reference and life experiences, and just everything is just different. It's like a real culture shock. That's definitely in here. I'm just saying, by making them family, that would create like a link between them that they can't walk away from, and gives them a reason to care and a reason to want to make this work. And it also makes it more grounded. And then you are adding in this relatable conflict of they don't really want him there anymore. They did 5 years ago when they were just, I don't know, like finishing high school, and he was like 35 instead of 40. At that point, he was still the cool uncle, and now he's not. But now he has to work for it, and now he has to either walk away from that and admit to himself that he's lost touch and stick to people his own age, which he's never had to do before, or he has to find another way to relate to these guys, or he has to pretend to be somebody he's not. Like, those are basically his choices. I think that can absolutely carry a movie, but by making them strangers, I think that makes it a lot harder to, number one, care about the stuff, and number two, make it believable, I think.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one.
And none of this is fatal, I don't think. I think they just had to connect the pieces more, because when this whole thing ends and Joe has seemingly leveled up and seemingly learned all the lessons, I didn't believe he learned the lessons, because the stuff in between is not closely enough connected in a way that I cared. And I feel like most of the events could have been swapped around or replaced with something else and would have been the same movie. You can't do that with a Superbad. You can't do that with a Hangover. You can't do that with a Date Night, I think. And I think there's another one where it's like 4 women on a bachelorette party and they end up killing a stripper, and they kind of have to figure it out. I tried to look up the name as we were talking. It's a Scarlett Johansson movie, I think. And it's I couldn't find it. It's not a great movie, but that still has this whole thing about like university friends coming together 10 years later to kind of send one of them off into her marriage. And then they realize they've grown apart and their friendship doesn't exist anymore. And they have to figure out if they can salvage it. And then the wacky hijinks happens. So again, much closer to the formula of the body disaster movie. I don't even know if it has an official name, but that kind of movie. And I think 72 Hours ignores all of those. And as a result, doesn't work as well.
To kind of keep this moving.
Yeah.
One thing I will give the movie actually is, and I've not seen this in a very, very, very long time, is the bloopers at the end of the movie. I don't know whether you stuck around.
I didn't even watch that.
Did you not? Fair.
So, okay, the movie's going on for another 20 minutes. I'm not going to watch that.
So I was just like on the sofa. I was like passed out on the sofa.
So you were the target audience?
I'm telling you, I watched this movie in the ideal situation that they wanted someone to watch this movie in. But I don't know, like I haven't seen anything like that since like Rush Hour days and like, you know, Rush Hour 1, Rush Hour 2, Rush Hour 3, etc. And you kind of just like miss some of like behind the scenes of them like messing things up, or like just like seeing like some of the chemistry of the cast behind the scenes, etc. And I don't think these are like the greatest bloopers in the world, but it was just like a nostalgic feeling for, I miss when movies would like have like the outtakes or the bloopers at the end of the movie, just kind of showing just like some of the fun stuff behind the scenes. It just kind of, I don't know, makes you feel a little bit more connected to like the making of the movie.
Yeah, I always assume they're fake, which is why I don't watch them. But I guess it sold you on the idea that these people actually had fun making this movie and actually had chemistry. Rush Hour is one of those cases. Like, Rush Hour is not like the movies we've been talking about. It's much closer to Rush Hour, I think, in its structure and its details. But Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan just have this amazing chemistry on top of a good script. And you have Jackie Chan's action and you have Chris Tucker's comedy. Like, all the pieces just come together in Rush Hour. This is like trying to be a little bit more like that, but I don't think it really gets there. But do you think watching the bloopers kind of sold you on the idea like that there's this actually like they were actually having a good time making this movie? It sounds like it improved the movie.
Oh no, I feel like some of the bloopers were like maybe a little bit forced, or like they weren't, like when Freshman was trying to do like Japanese speaking scene or whatever, and he's just kind of like talking gibberish, and then you kind of see people like dying of laughter. I was like, it's not that funny. I don't know. I didn't quite whatever. He was honestly just talking gibberish. He wasn't like actually like trying to speak Japanese.
They just gave him like 5 words to say, like that his character knows, but he didn't actually know anything else.
No, he didn't know anything else. And again, in the bloopers, it's not like he's actually saying the Japanese words as well, which was like, again, disappointing. It wasn't, it wasn't even that.
You're really selling it.
Yeah, no, I'm very much saying I like that the bloopers were there. I'm not saying that I like the bloopers at all.
It's a fine distinction.
Basically.
Not sure what to say to that. It sounds like I didn't miss much.
Yeah. No, nothing else on that one.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah. So I guess in conclusion, 72 hours. To be fair, I think we actually said a lot more on this movie than I kind of thought. But I think it is testament to the movie that there is some ideas in there, and that there is like, you know, some things going on. And I know at the top of it, you kind of said like it could like lean kind of more into one or the other. I think it strikes a fine enough balance where there's like something there without, you know, it being too heavy. Whilst trying to attempt to kind of provide some like light entertainment through some different crazy scenes. Like the previous movies that we mentioned are like the gold standards of those type of movies where, you know, they just kind of like found the perfect formula, found the perfect cast, found the perfect script, and it just kind of like meshed into like a brilliant movie. Quite famously, if you kind of bring it back to Superbad, where Jonah Hill actually didn't even like the actor that played McLovin because he just kind of roasted him on the thing and genuinely didn't like him. So they casted him for that reason, just because they had that dislike and that chemistry kind of came across on screen and stuff like that. It's clearly like not on that level. I think it's average where, you know, you're not hating your experience watching this movie. It's not like, you know, complete slog to get through. I kind of like half enjoyed my time, half was like, it's a bit doing too much. I think overall it's an enjoyable movie for the most part. Don't expect any fine art. I'm finding it really hard to rate this movie because I was going to say I wouldn't even recommend like if you were to like watch something like this with your friends. Maybe if you've gone through all the other movies and you've kind of run out of things and you just want to put something on, then maybe you can put this on. But, you know, it's not even one that I would say like you have to watch with like friends or anything like that at all. It's just kind of there. It's fine. If you catch it on streaming, you do. If you don't, you haven't missed anything. So with that, 6 out of 10.
I think a big reason for why I'm so cold on this movie is that I think the first 20 minutes are actually quite good and they kind of promise a better movie, and then it gets really generic for like an hour, and then you get a tacked on ending that kind of makes it seem as if something happened in the movie when it really didn't. I also think the episodes are not crazy enough. Like they really try to really push it, but I think it's more about being loud as opposed to saying something, right? Like it's easy to just scream really loud. It's not more difficult to actually say something interesting. And that is exactly what this movie is doing. I do think it's better than most Netflix productions. And I don't know if this was made by Netflix or if this was acquired by Netflix, but I'm used to worse from Netflix. So maybe on that level, the beginning of the movie put me into a somewhat hopeful mood. And then I just failed to care for the rest, like the last 2/3 of the movie. And that's not a good place for the movie to be in. The story didn't have to be anything crazy. I think this movie could have either been about the wacky hijinks, or it could have been about this story of growing up and learning responsibility and like all of those things that are kind of hinted at in the first 20 minutes. And it had to pick a lane and it had to do something well. And I don't think it does. And so it gets compared to better movies, and it doesn't do anything sufficiently different to warrant being its own thing, but it also doesn't copy the good movies or the better movies to a point where it kind of rides its coattails. So it's kind of this underwhelming mix of things where it's not quite there, and I just had to struggle to pay attention in the middle parts of it. If a movie is in that position, that's not a good place. That's not where you want to be. So that's a 5 out of 9 for me. It just doesn't rise to the level of good in any of the categories.
Yeah, I think we're similar on that. But yeah, I guess that's all we have for you guys today. And as always, if you reached this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate you. We appreciate your support and just kind of generally checking us out. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed that discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we're chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, you should take a ride in the pink limo. We are the I've Done Podcast.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.